Paralympian Oscar Pistorius' time behind bars is nearing the end as he served about half of his 13-year prison sentence for the murder of his girlfriend, Reeva Steenkamp. But there's actually no clarity as to when exactly he'll be eligible for parole. For more on this, as well as the time frames that are attached to it, let's bring in the Correctional Services Department spokesperson, Singabakho Nxumalo, who joins us now via our video link. And Singabakho, it's always great chatting to you, sir. Thanks very much indeed for making time. So let's begin around the clarity of when Oscar Pistorius is actually eligible for parole. My understanding is that it happens obviously when you served half your sentence, but what complicates issues now is that the Supreme Court of Appeal had actually amended the time that he spent behind bars because of an error that it made. Are you able to clarify this issue for us?
A very good morning, and thank you for having us. I've seen a number of media reports talking about possible parole placement for Mr. Oscar Pistorius, and as a department, we are not yet there. What we've clarified through responding to a media inquiry was the issue of the victim-offender dialogue, that all inmates, before they are considered for parole placement, they ought to participate in that particular program. And that's where we are. We confirmed that we have contacted the victim's family, the Steenkamp, and we are at the stage where we are preparing all parties for this highly sensitive and emotional process, because it ought to be done by specialists. So that's where we are. But coming back to your question, inmates who are sentenced to a determined period ought to serve the minimum required time, in simple English, that is like half of the sentence, before they are considered for parole placement. That is not a guarantee that they'll be placed out, but they have to appear before the parole board. A determination is then made, then a decision gets taken whether those people are now ready to be sent back into the community, where they will continue serving the remainder of the sentence.
So to be clear, Oscar Pistorius hasn't yet appeared before the parole board, but he may very well be eligible for parole.
He has not appeared because he still has to undergo this particular process. It will not assist to take his file before the parole board when there is one program there which is outstanding, because the parole board will send his profile back. And as a department, we have to make it a point that all that is required is there, that all processes have been followed, and also checking on the correctional sentence plan if everything that ought to be there has been included. So as a department, that's what we've clarified, to say we have to make it a point that everything that has to be inside that file is there. Hence then, victim-offender dialogue is one such program, and very critical, that is outstanding, and we are busy with arrangements for that.
Right. Speak to us about what that process actually entails, this victims offender dialogue. I mean, for instance, what are the requirements from the family specifically of the victim?
As I've stated, it's very sensitive, highly emotional, hence even within our force, only specialists manage this particular process. Here I'm talking about social workers, psychologists, and spiritual caregivers, because one, you ought to prepare the victims and explain in detail what victim-offender dialogue is, what it seeks to achieve, and what is the likely outcome. But also prepare the inmate or the perpetrator to say, you ought to comprehend the harm that you have caused to the victims, the community, even your own family, because it's not just about the victim and the perpetrator, but it will also include the family of the perpetrator, because they then become victims as well. So you therefore need specialists to handle this particular process. You have to explain it to them in detail, the phases that it will take, and even when you come to a point where you get to sit, because you start with mediation, from mediation you move into a dialogue session. Even during the dialogue session, whenever the specialists feel that perhaps there are other interventions that ought to be made, they will make that particular call. But what is important is that there ought to be an opportunity for parties to either reconcile or seek an apology, but it has to be done in a very sensitive way, so that it doesn't, you prevent causing further harm to the victims, but you start to bring all parties together with time, because it's not a once-off process. People respond differently. Others it may take months, others years, but at least, the platform has to be there, because the victim may say, you know what, I've got questions to ask, and I need you to respond, honestly. And then parties start to find one another. Maybe then after a while, they could reconcile, and then because what we want at the end of the day is that people within this country must live in harmony. Those who have caused harm to others must comprehend that and then try to find each other.
So, Singabakho, there are reports that Reeva Steenkamp's family has agreed to be part of this process. Is that something you can confirm?
We have contacted the Steenkamp family, and their lawyer has indicated their willingness to participate. But even if that is the case, we have to prepare them thoroughly. The inmate here is based in Gauteng, and the victim's family is in another province. What we are busy with now is, we're working out on logistical arrangements, because the environment has to favor the victims in a way that it doesn't have to cause them harm or strain. And it's something that you cannot just say, let us do it via a video link or Microsoft Teams. You ought to make it a point that you've responded well to their needs, and that environment, they will find comfort in it. So that's where we are.
Yeah. What happens in a context where the victim's family, yes, agreed to be part of the process, but are not happy with the outcome of the process at the end of it?
Yes, it's not a once-off process, hence I've stated. It ought to continue. Even if, let's say, the inmate has been granted parole, is out there, or even has served the entire of the sentence, we never give up. Hence there is even what we call the aftercare. So that at the end of the day, at least people, find space, either for forgiveness or even to live in harmony. Yeah. Hence, as the department, we say, for as long as we ought to facilitate, for as long as we ought to protect each party, we will do that, because once, let's say, the inmate has served the entire sentence, there are other avenues where you can hand over that particular process to the other departments, or even if, let's say, people have got means then to proceed utilizing private means, you encourage that. But as a department, we can't afford to give up merely by saying one party is no longer willing to participate. You've got to persuade them so that at the end of the day, all of them do see the need and they gain out of that particular process. Because at the end of the day, it's all about placing the victim at the center of the criminal justice system.
Yeah. So are you saying there is a scenario where Oscar Pistorius could be out without the backing of Reeva Steenkamp's family? Is that a possibility?
When the parole board considers an inmate whose profile has been presented to them, there's a number of variables that they look at. It is not just one element, and they have to satisfy themselves that the person that they are considered is now ready to reintegrate back into society. So you can't then favor one element and say, because this one, there is opposing view, because then what becomes key there are the reports from specialists, which will then indicate after the assessment whether this person is ready and whether this person is likely to reoffend or not. But then at the end of the day, it's all about placing a person out there who will be of less danger to society.
So the answer to my question then is yes.
The answer to your question is that you consider a number of factors before you take that decision.
Sure. And one of those scenarios, and I appreciate there's no telling what the future looks like, but from what you've essentially said, there is very much a possibility that Oscar Pistorius could be out, even if Reeva Steenkamp's family, as one party, as one stakeholder, is unhappy with the process.
I'll give a typical example. You find that a person has multiple victims. Some are willing to participate, some are not willing to participate. But you ought to then reach out to all of them to say, here's an opportunity for you to participate in the victim offender dialogue, or to make representation even to the parole board when they consider that particular person. But the process has to involve everyone. Then the parole board will be armed with necessary information to make the determination.
This case has also attracted a lot of public interest. I don't need to explain that to you. You probably know that more than I do. How could that possibly complicate this process?
You ought to treat inmates equally. You ought to deal with what is in front of you. Even if, let's say, a case attracted even, let's say, international audience, that must never place in jeopardy, the matter in front of you. So the reports from specialists, the correctional sentence plan, all other factors, ought to be looked at and a decision gets taken. Yes, you ought to be sensitive in terms of how people, are likely, to react to that. Hence, it is important that whatever decision that is taken, it has to be explained so that people understand even the rationale behind it. Because at the end of the day, law then dictates what needs to happen. That a person must serve at least a minimum time, then that person must go to before the parole board for consideration. And if that person is fit to reintegrate back into society, a decision then gets taken. But if not, unfortunately, will not be placed out, because parole placement is a privilege, not a right.
There are plenty of moving parts. Very quickly, Singabakho, in 10 seconds if you can, do you have perhaps a timeline of when, if there are no surprises in this process, Oscar Pistorius may very well be out? For instance, there's a date being punted around that March 2023 may be that time.
It is quite difficult to put a date, because once this particular process has been handled, and then I cannot say finalized, but it has to take place. And the specialists are in a position to then provide a report. Then our case management committee is able to put together the profile. It must then go before the parole board. The parole board will then, and then engage in it, then make a decision. Hence, then it's difficult for one then to put a date. But what is key here is that an inmate has to have served the minimum required time before the profile is submitted before them.
Singabakho Nxumalo, thanks very much indeed for speaking to us. Really appreciate your time on the
It can only be a pleasure. Thank you.
Singabakho Nxumalo is the spokesperson for the Correctional Services Department.